Today we'll be looking at the Hbada P2 Ergonomic Office Chair. This is an all-mesh ergonomic office chair that comes in at around $200 on Amazon after coupons. Now, all-mesh office chairs are pretty hard to pull off, especially at this price point. In fact, most budget all-mesh chairs that I've tested in the past haven't been very good. In general, it's just really difficult to make a comfortable mesh seat, even for higher-end chairs, let alone the budget ones. That said, I've been hearing a lot of good things about Hbada chairs lately, so when they reached out and wanted to send over the P2 for review, I was really excited to give it a try. In this video, I'll be giving you my full review of the Hbada P2 after testing it for the past 2 weeks. We'll dive into all the key features, highlighting everything I liked about the chair, as well as the things that I didn't like, so by the end, you'll have a clear idea of whether this chair is going to be the right fit for you. Now, Hbada did send me this chair for free, but they're not paying me to say anything good or bad. All opinions are completely my own. That said, I will have some affiliate links in the description if you want to check out the P2 for yourself. So with that out of the way, let's get right into the review, starting with the design. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the Hbada P2 has a pretty modern aesthetic with its all-mesh construction. It comes in both white and black color configurations, and these neutral colors really make it fit well into most work environments. Like I said, it has a really nice modern look, and I think it would work well in a traditional office setting, home office, or even a gaming setup. Overall, the design is pretty clean and functional. Now, one minor criticism I have about the design is on the backrest frame. You can actually see the structural ribbing in the plastic mold from the front of the chair. Now, it's not the biggest deal because functionally it doesn't affect the chair at all, but it does make the chair look a bit unfinished, almost as if there should be another piece covering it. Also, since the P2 uses different mesh material for the seat and the backrest, it doesn't have a completely uniform look like some of their higher end chairs. Again, not a big deal, but just something I noticed. From the back of the chair, the design looks pretty clean though. Now let's talk about the actual comfort of the chair, starting with the seat, which is surprisingly one of the strongest features of this chair. Now, mesh seats can be really polarizing. Some people love them and some people hate them. And on top of that, they're actually really hard to pull off well, even for high-end chairs, let alone the budget ones. That said, the P2 probably has the most comfortable mesh seat I've tested in a $200 chair. The mesh material has good elasticity and feels springy. It provides solid support, but like most mesh sheets, it does feel pretty firm because of how tightly they need to wrap the mesh around the frame. The advantage, of course, is that you get a nice suspended feeling and excellent breathability, which is great if you're someone who tends to run hot while you're sitting. The seat is relatively wide, which is nice because it prevents you from feeling cramped. Personally, I prefer wider mesh seats because they help keep you from coming into contact with the hard plastic frame, especially if you're someone with wider hips. One standout feature that really impressed me is that Hbada actually moved away from using a foam pad in the front of the seat. This is a huge win and makes it one of the most comfortable mesh seats I've used for $200. You see, most mesh chairs include a foam pad at the front that's meant to provide cushion for your legs so they don't come into contact with the hard plastic frame. The problem with this design is that when you're sitting in the chair, you actually sink below that foam pad, which causes a creasing effect. This can make it really uncomfortable because you can feel the foam pad digging into the bottom of your thighs, creating distinct pressure points. Higher end chairs like the Herman Miller Aeron Remastered and the Ergonomic Gen 2 have actually moved away from this foam pad design, so it's really nice to see that Hbada is doing the same with a $200 chair. Along with not having the foam pad, the P2 has a pretty deep waterfall front edge to prevent your legs from coming into contact with that frame, which further enhances the comfort. That said, if you're someone who likes to sit cross-legged or with one leg tucked under the other, then this chair probably isn't going to be a good fit. If you sit cross-legged, then your ankles will kind of dig into that hard plastic frame, but this is typical for pretty much all mesh chairs since they need to have a rigid frame to wrap the mesh around. Now, one missing feature is a seat pan depth adjustment. Now, with mesh chairs, pretty much only the higher end chairs will have kind of a seat slider so that you can adjust the seat pan depth. And a lot of higher end chairs like the Herman Miller Aeron and Steelcase Carmen actually don't have that feature either. The lack of a seat pan depth adjustment limits the range of people who can comfortably sit in the chair, so keep that in mind depending on your height. Moving on to the backrest, the P2 uses a different type of mesh than what's on the seat. It's a more fabric type mesh rather than the plastic type of mesh, making it softer to the touch. It's double layered, which gives it some nice cushioning. It almost feels like it's padded. Now, this mesh doesn't have as much elasticity as the mesh on the seat, so you can kind of sink into it a bit. That said, it's still really breathable and overall pretty comfortable. One potential issue is that since you can kind of sink into it a bit, you may be able to feel that hard plastic frame underneath when you're moving around and stretching. This is a pretty common issue with mesh backrests, but when you're sitting normally in the middle of the backrest though, I didn't really notice this. Now, what really makes the backrest unique is the 3D floating lumbar support system. It offers a 10-degree front to back floating motion, a 5 cm height adjustment range, and a 10-degree side to side motion. That said, while it's technically 3D, you can only actually adjust the height. The other motions are meant to allow the lumbar support to adapt to your movements as you stretch or move around from side to side. The height adjustment range is pretty good and really allows you to get the lumbar support in that perfect sweet spot. The lumbar support uses the same double layered mesh as the backrest, so it feels soft and cushioned. It gives you a nice hugging feeling and is very supportive. It's definitely a pronounced lumbar support, but doesn't feel pokey or like it's digging into your back. One thing to consider is that there's no depth adjustment for the lumbar support and it's not removable, so you really can't get it out of the way if you want to. You're pretty much forced to use it, which might be an issue if you don't like aggressive lumbar support. But overall, I really like the way this lumbar support feels. Now, I'm someone who usually doesn't like aggressive lumbar, but I actually find this one really comfortable even for long sessions. When it comes to the recline, the P2 has a synchro tilt mechanism that feels pretty smooth. It offers a deep recline at 135 degrees. You can also lock the backrest in 3 different recline positions, at 105 degrees, at 115 degrees, and at the full 135 degrees. This makes it good for when you're just kicking back and relaxing, lounging, or just full on resting. The adjustment mechanism is pretty basic, using a shared lever for the height adjustment and the tilt lock. You can lock the chair either upright or in a reclined position by pulling out on the lever. The P2 also has a tilt tension knob adjusted underneath the seat. Now personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this placement because it makes it pretty much impossible to adjust the tilt tension while you're sitting in the chair. Now I'm someone who needs to frequently adjust the tilt tension depending on what I'm doing, so this placement is pretty annoying. That said, this isn't exclusive to the P2 by any means. In fact, most budget chairs will have the tilt tension knob placed in this spot, so it's kind of to be expected for this price range. Nothing that'll wow you, but definitely gets the job done, and I didn't have any issues with it. The P2 comes with 3D adjustable armrests, which is pretty good for a chair in this price range. You get height, depth, and pivot adjustments, and the range of motion on each of these adjustments is pretty good. My only gripe is that I wish they would go a little bit lower so you can really kind of get them out of the way when you're not using them. But aside from that, I found it pretty easy to get them into a proper position for most tasks. The arms have metal components, so they feel sturdy with very little play. This is good for when you really need to kind of push off of those armrests to shift positions or to get up out of the chair. Now when it comes to the arm pads themselves, they're actually really good on the P2. They're soft and squishy, which makes them very comfortable, especially when you really need to dig your elbows into them. Now most budget chairs that I've tested in the past have had really hard and stiff arm pads, so this was a really nice surprise for me. I've actually used chairs that cost twice as much as the P2 with significantly worse arm pads. They also hold the position pretty well, so you don't really need to worry about accidentally bumping them out of position. Overall, the armrests on this chair are really good, especially for the price point. The headrest on the Hbada P2 is pretty decent. It's definitely a basic design in terms of adjustability, but definitely gets the job done. It's a 2D headrest with height and pivot adjustments. The range of motion is good and the adjustments hold their position pretty well. I could pretty easily get it into the position that I like, whether it's supporting the back of my head or sitting right in the curve of my neck. Now, one downside is the lack of depth adjustment. This makes it a bit harder to use the headrest while you're sitting upright, especially if you're someone who tends to sit more forward in your chair. So without any depth adjustment, I think this headrest is better suited for when you're reclining. It uses the same mesh as the backrest, so you get that soft, almost cushioned feeling that's comfortable and breathable. The shape has a nice curve to it, so it fits right into the crook of your neck and feels very supportive. One thing to point out though is that there's a pretty hard, rigid frame underneath the headrest. So when you sink into the mesh part and move your head around, you might come into contact with that outer frame, but in regular use, I didn't notice too many issues. Overall, I think this headrest is solid. It's a pretty basic design and I wish it had a little more adjustability, but it's comfortable to use and holds its position well. You really can't ask for much more in a chair at this price point. When it comes to materials and build quality, the Hbada P2 is pretty much what you'd expect for a $200 chair. I will say it's pretty good compared to other sub $200 chairs that I've tried, but it's not amazing. The frame is primarily made of plastic. If you look closely, you can notice some minor imperfections in the plastic molding. I actually spotted a few small dents right out of the box, but nothing major. But these are purely aesthetic issues and don't affect the comfort or functionality of the chair at all. The mesh on both the seat and the backrest feel pretty decent. The seat has a lot of elasticity, so I don't expect it to sag anytime soon. And the backrest feels really soft, which makes it comfortable to sink into. For the base, Hbada went with a metal design, which is good, but comes in 6 pieces that you need to screw together. This is pretty typical for budget office chairs because it allows them to fit the chair into a smaller box and save on shipping costs. Overall, the build quality is okay. Nothing that will wow you, but it gets the job done. It's definitely not high-end by any means, but I think you can easily get a solid 2 to 3 years of use out of this chair, which is indicative of their 3-year warranty policy. Now, like I said, the Hbada P2 comes in at $199 with a coupon on Amazon, and at this price, I think it's a really good value for the money. You're getting pretty decent adjustability options and comfort for a chair in this price range. All mesh chairs are generally really hard to pull off, especially the budget ones, and I think the P2 does a really good job, all things considered. The biggest standout feature to me is definitely the seat. Not having the foam pad in the front was an excellent decision since you don't get any of that pressure buildup underneath your thighs like you do with most mesh seats. It's probably the most comfortable $200 mesh seat that I've used. As for the policy, policies, Hbada offers a 3-year warranty and a 30-day free return period, which is pretty good for a chair at this price point. Overall, I think the Hbada P2 ergonomic chair is a really good chair for $200. While it's not perfect and there are some compromises in terms of build quality and adjustability, it delivers where it matters most, which is comfort. And like I said earlier, all mesh chairs are really hard to pull off. There aren't too many all mesh chairs at this price range that I would even recommend. So if you're someone who tends to run hot and needs a breathable chair, or if you just prefer the feel of mesh over traditional padding, then the Hbada P2 is one of the better options you'll find on a budget. If you're interested in checking this chair out, I'll have links to it down in the description.